Al Gore column. Just telling you, that state's going to flip.
The United
I really feel
States
that way.
has a new president, George Walker Bush.
Put me on. Gore has retracted his concession.
It was one of the most extraordinary political dramas in American history. Election 2000, 36 days that gripped the nation. Hello, I'm Bill Hemmer at the CNN Center in Atlanta. Chances are it'll be a very long time before any of us think of Florida the same way again. That famous sunshine and surf now eclipsed by dimpled Chad and butterfly ballots. But what a wild ride it was. And what an amazing education for all of us. But looking back now, what did we learn? Tonight we're hitting the rewind button, how 5 amazing weeks unfolded day by day, hour by hour, and many times minute by minute. We begin, though, where else, with the one night everyone thought would give America its next president, November 7th, election night.
Greg, George W. Bush.
Huzzah. Track it full, kill everything else.
I'm doing great today. I feel good. I will feel better when I know that our people are going to go to the polls, and that's why I'm calling.
Have a picture ID, please.
Prior to going on the air, we have a readout of exit polling to get an idea of how the voters are voting and what they're saying when they leave the polling places. You always have to remember that the run-up has been more than a year of covering this story, covering the candidates.
It's very important to vote. What kind of person do you want to pick?
My friend.
We had been on the road for a long time. Election night, November 7th, constituted our grand finale.
Stand by your music under standard roll X.
It was supposed to be a close election, but you know, you never really know whether the polls are going to be right on or not.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Thank you.
Testing.
We've all covered elections, so yes, we thought it was going to be close.
For the first time in 25 years, we didn't know who the president was going to be hours before we went on the air. The normal thing that has happened over the last quarter century, from 1980 on, is around 2 o'clock the exit poll results come in.
In 1996, we knew at 2 o'clock that Bill Clinton was going to win. In 92, I think we knew around 5 o'clock that Clinton would win. We certainly knew back in 88 that Bush would be a handy winner. We knew that. This one we did not know.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As close as it looks right now.
People would come up to me, including some CNN executives, and they would take me aside and say, Bill, tell me, what do you really think is going to happen? I know you can't go on record on this, but what do you think is going to happen? And I would say, quite honestly, you know, I don't know. And I was right.
A big call to make. CNN announces that we call Florida in the Al Gore column.
This is a roadblock the size of a boulder to George W. Bush's path to the White House.
I almost immediately got a call from George Bush's top political strategist, just screaming, "You guys called this race, you know, before the Panhandle polls code. You're wrong. You're wrong." Boy, you begin to look at those other big battleground states, Pennsylvania, Michigan. They become so much more important now.
This, a major boost for the Gore campaign, a cheer going up here in Nashville.
It was a strange night. I mean, it was sort of a cold, rainy night. You have this crowd waiting for Gore. And I stopped about halfway through the night trying to find any adjectives to describe it because I didn't think there were any.
The results in Florida have got to be bittersweet for the Bush family. Of course, the brother of Governor Bush, the sitting governor in Florida, that can't be a happy one for the Bush family.
There are 500,000 absentee ballots out there. I'm just telling you, that state's going to flip. And I do remember Governor Bush saying something to the effect, I'm not sure, we've got our own information.
I believe we've got enough evidence to be able to call the state.
We're running much stronger than we need to in the Democrat areas.
And about the same time, Karl Rove, Bush's chief strategist, telling us in an interview.
We feel good about Florida.
I listened to that. We all did. And we thought, well, is this partisan spin?
Little did we know that the fact is that they had some real serious reasons to express those sentiments, and that became apparent very quickly.
George Bush has got to win Ohio. He has got to win Tennessee and Arkansas. He has got to win Missouri. These projections are not infallible. There are times when the networks have to eat a hearty portion of crow. And I was saying on the air at that moment, you know, sometimes we do have to eat crow at these predictions.
I stand by.
At that
CNN
moment, Bernie
right
comes in
now.
and says, we're taking Florida off the table, which is when I piped up with,
Into the too close to
One order of
call.
crow, please.
Crow, yes.
It needs to be said, I think, that part of the problem was that everybody got complacent about the accuracy of these calls.
I think you can hear the crowd reaction.
It was a moment to gasp. My God, this is incredible. We're pulling back Florida. We pulled back calls in a few other cases in the past, but a big one like this in Florida, that was a real surprise.
So they just traded off, right? Bush gets Florida, he wins.
Working this through. What if Gore gets Florida and Bush gets the other side?
Then Bush wins.
And then all of a sudden, everything was unknown. The end of the night was unknown. We didn't know where in the world things were going or how long this was going to last.
Florida is, Al Gore got what he needed to get.
I remember Hal Bruno, who was there that night, standing there showing us a close-up map of Dade County, Broward County, and Palm Beach County. Now, little did we know what those three counties would come to mean later on.
Now, the strength of the Democrats is here in Miami.
I remember he was pointing out the Gold Coast, saying, you know, once we know, you know, what these votes do, we'll know more.
The United States has a new president. He's the Texas Governor, George Walker Bush.
I remember being focused on what Hal Bruno and some other people were telling us, that these votes were still coming in, and then it seemed like 20 minutes later, we called Florida for Bush at 2:15, 2:18 in the morning. And I remember thinking, how did this happen so quickly? These people who were doing these calculations must have, you know, they must really have a crystal ball that's working now.
Never was there hesitancy in my mind because we had a staff of people who were watching the exit poll data, and once they reached a conclusion about the race, the information was relayed to us on the anchor desk.
Absolute redemption for...
And it fell to me to report that, and I reported it.
Talk to me, please. Hey, Gore called Bush. He's going to concede in the speech here.
Bush wins. Florida goes Bush. The presidency is Bush. That's it.
There were gasps of no and screams of no. The face is quite glum.
And people started moaning and groaning and booing, and a lot of them started turning around to look at where we were up on the platform.
The vice president placed a phone call to the Texas governor, congratulated him on winning the election, and in brief remarks here tonight to his supporters and, of course, to the American people, will wish the governor well.
We knew that the speech guy, the body guy, had come out with the speech and fed it into the teleprompter, so the concession speech was ready to go, and then 5 minutes becomes 10 minutes, becomes 15 minutes, and we're all working the phones furiously.
So Bob Butterworth, who's
and you know, we reported that there's some communication going on.
Butterworth's with the Attorney General, right?
So then Candy pops up.
Hang on, let me call. The producer hands me the phone, and the source says to me, the vice president has just called the governor and retracted his concession.
Anything else I need to know?
And I said,
Okay,
okay.
thanks very much.
I mean, it took me 3 times. I mean, I felt like it was some sort of biblical thing going, tell me that again, are you sure? Because it's one of those stories that you think, and I knew nobody else had it. So that's a very exciting time. But you're almost scared of it.
Put me on. Gore has retracted his concession.
Stunned disbelief.
That was the most memorable moment of the evening. That's when I believe I audibly gasped and said, I don't believe this.
Because of where the CNN anchor desk is, in that newsroom, surrounded by perhaps 100 people or more, there was an audible gasp. That's the sort of thing that you just don't think is going to happen, but you actually heard.
Al Gore calls George W., and he says, you know, since our last conversation, things have changed. And I'm being told by my people on the ground in Florida that I might actually win. And Governor Bush says, well, I'm sitting here with my brother Jeb, and Jeb says there's no problem that I'm going to win Florida, and I don't know why you would want to do something like that. And so the vice president says something to the effect of, now don't go get snippy with me. snippy.
We do not have a winner in our electoral college count because the state of Florida is now rated officially as a toss-up.
Never have we seen anything like this in the entire history of the country.
Bill Daley of the Gore campaign.
I've been in politics a very long time, but I don't think there's ever been a night like this one.
We are in a state of political suspended animation.
At the governor's mansion, they are trying to figure this out at the moment.
Don Evans, a longtime close friend of George W. Bush.
They're still counting, and I'm confident when it's all said and done, we will prevail.
It's not over. It simply is not over.
And at 5 o'clock, we were being told that it would take 10 days. Well, 10 days to resolve a presidential election? That's unheard of. But who would have believed it was going to take 36 days?
No one imagined it could go anywhere past Thanksgiving, which was 2 weeks away. But I figured by the weekend we'd probably know, because it's usually not that complicated a process to count the few remaining votes.
As soon as I think anybody looked at the state of Florida's rules for recounts and 7 days and a contest period, and that this was where the presidency was going to be decided, and that we were down to a margin of under 1,000 votes out of 6 million, yeah, I think the sense was that just nobody knew how long this was going to take.
A new day, but still no new president. The White House is still up for grabs.
It is a presidential election, still too close to call, on this the morning after. It kind of feels a whole lot like the night before. I went on the air on my regular shift at 9 a.m. the next morning. Tired from the night before, but just like, wow, we're supposed to get a president, right? I mean, that's why we have this national election, and that's what everybody thought. But clearly, this was not the normal election.
Bush wins it. A couple hours later, the Miami Herald comes out with "not over yet."
Certainly an accurate headline this morning, because we just don't know where things stand.
How many hours of sleep did you get last night?
About 2. How about you?
About 3 and a half, actually.
Morning. I think Bush initially made a mistake in assuming he had won.
Secretary Cheney and I have carried the state of Florida.
It looked very presumptuous.
I'm in the process of planning in a responsible way a potential administration.
He was looking presidential in the photo opportunities.
Morning, everybody.
He seemed to be going out about the business of setting up his transition.
Got a name?
He got the message very quickly and decided to lay off, and he stayed in the background very wisely, letting Gore look like the guy who was desperate to recount the ballots and to win, and who was pushing this along.
We still do not know the outcome of yesterday's vote. This matter must be resolved expeditiously.
The Gore we saw in the post-election was the Gore that everybody saw, for better or worse, in the election. Kind of at pains to make an appearance that didn't seem to comport with reality. You know, oh, I'm just here playing touch football with my family. I'm just going out to the movies. When everybody knew he was gaming the strategy, saying these things like, it's not about me, it's about the process. Well, you know, it is about you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
His reputation is one of a micromanager, and in this case, he was very hands-on, very engaged, very much a part of the discussions, in fact, very much a leader in the discussions.
They began the recount of some 587,000 votes.
Under the law, the original recount is just a machine recount. You take all those ballots back out of the boxes and you run them back through the machines.
Each time those ballots are fed through it, you will get different results because the machine will read them differently.
Sometimes when it's put into the machine doesn't read that the hole has been pushed.
That's right. Sometimes the debris gets in the way.
What the election law folk call a hanging chad.
And that's when most of us, for the first time in our life, heard the word Chad.
C-H-A-D, I believe, right?
We're also dealing with an issue up in the Palm Beach area where some voters have claimed that the voting procedure is confusing. Al Gore is the second name on this side, but the third hole down.
The butterfly ballot was a huge issue, and the interesting thing is that the person who created it, Teresa Lepore, who was on the canvassing board down in Palm Beach, created it in October to make voting easier.
Sue, yesterday you went to vote. What happened?
I could cast my vote, but it was not in line with my candidates. I had to either go above it or below it.
You cannot appreciate as a voter the full confusion until you actually stick your ballot into the machine.
And Representative Wexler, I think with great style and panache, came on to defend and said, look, these butterfly ballots are difficult to understand.
Of course, the flip side of the argument is why didn't you ask?
Trust the people! Trust the people! Go, Bush, go! We vote!
As the presidency hung in the balance, the tensions and the voices continued to rise.
We got Bushwick! We got Bushwick!
We had a lot of retirees saying, I think I accidentally voted for Pat Buchanan.
I've been actually feeling physically ill thinking I did that.
You are a very intelligent lady. You should read your sample ballot. I didn't want Buchanan. I didn't want Gore. And up here there was a name, B-U-S-H.
Well, for you, but then you didn't have the same ballot books that we did.
Some of them had a little emotion about it, too.
This ballot, it is accepted.
None of these people really know who they voted for. They're just upset, in my opinion, that Gore lost.
Now, you might think this count would take place behind closed doors. Indeed it is, but there are lots of windows in the room, too, so you can get a live look at this historical count in progress.
They decided to count 1% of the total ballots by hand. Here they were sitting in this room, holding up the ballots to the light, trying to see if sunlight was coming in, and realizing that if they found a big change in the amount of votes, then they would decide to count all 100% of the county's votes. The one image I will always remember about the post-election period of the year 2000 is this. Looking at the Chads.
There are actually 3 types of Chad that are being counted as a vote. Hanging Chad.
And we got into this issue of, do you count the hanging Chads, the one-cornered Chads, the dimpled Chads, and how is it that you decide which one is a vote for who? By using the phrase, the intent of the voter.
But a Chad that is fully attached, bearing only an indentation, should not be counted as a vote.
I move that this board conduct a manual recount of all the ballots for the presidential election for the year 2000.
How many times must you count a ballot before it's a vote for our...
And just like in Palm Beach County, there are all kinds of accusations flying about here, some as strange as a Democratic observer allegedly munching on the Chad from a ballot.
How many Chads must fall to the ground before you don't count them no more?
To a Republican operative offering me a Ziploc baggie filled with Chads that he claimed were collected from the room over here.
The answer may be on CNN.
What's the latest vote total? Did she tell you that?
I saw it on CNN screen. It was 400 votes spread.
The surrogates have flown in here from the Gore camp and the Bush camp.
I would like to introduce the senior members of the litigation team.
George Bush hired as good a lawyers as he could get and said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Why don't you go down to Florida and fix this mess and let me know how it's going.
Here in Florida, hurricane country, they're saying this is the eye of the hurricane.
There's no singular star in this, and they came in duets, but dancing different dances.
Are you safe saying that there's a legal fight ensuing in this race?
Oh, already there's been suits filed, and I would imagine this will continue for a while, as it should.
I don't think anyone thinks that a lengthy and protracted scores of lawyers, endless legal battles with no reasonable or foreseeable conclusion would be healthy for the country.
Bush, we are told, has given Baker the authority to challenge a hand count of the ballots in Florida.
Remember how critical they had been of, it was Al Gore and his lawyers suing to steal an election. And all of a sudden you had George Bush's team, preparing to go to a lot of courts.
The legal strategy was very simple. For the Democrats, it was count the vote.
What we're doing is a constitutional process. There's no constitutional crisis.
For the Republicans, it was the vote has been counted, let's certify it.
We ask that there be no further recounts of already recounted ballots.
And that's how they both approached it.
The twists and turns of Election 2000 continue. The Secretary of State of Florida giving us the latest information.
There's a two-page statement here from Katherine Harris, the Secretary of State, just being handed out now to reporters.
Secretary of State told Warren Christopher in the meeting that the election will be certified at 5 p.m. tomorrow.
We will all remember these times.
Katherine
Some of the most
Harris,
critical
Secretary of State, was a woman who was on the hot seat from the word go.
This is not someone who is not interested in the outcome of this. She was one of Governor Bush's campaign chairs.
It's very historic.
They had a campaign to vilify her as a partisan hack who was delivering the state for the Bush brothers with whom she was very close.
In Katherine Harris, they saw the first opportunity to swing the political debate and to say, what's the hurry? We're only trying to count votes. Why would George Bush's crony want to shut down the count of the votes? And so there were anonymous phone calls from Gore aides and leading Democrats saying, you know, she campaigned for George Bush in New Hampshire. They sensed a political opportunity there to turn it, and they weighed in very aggressively.
The Gore spokesman have called her a hack.
Katherine Harris is a fine lady, and they should lay off of her.
In talking to the Republicans, on the record and off, they believe that the attacks were very personal and uncalled for, and that they're ready to duke it out.
We have entered the action in asking the court to stop the Secretary of State from ending the vote counting tomorrow night.
Look, I would not want to win the presidency by a few votes cast in error. And I don't think Governor Bush wants that either.
In the race for the President of the United States, these certified results...
So she goes ahead and certifies, and the question then becomes, what happens to these votes that have not yet been counted?
Ladies and gentlemen, the Florida Supreme Court.
The Democrats go to court and say, we wish the vote counting to continue.
This court certainly has the power to say, what we're going to do is tell the county boards that you've got this amount of time to complete your recount.
We think the process is entirely subjective, subject to mischief.
Good evening. Again, my name is Craig Waters.
The Florida Supreme Court agreed unanimously in a very short period of time with the Democratic side.
The right of the people to cast their vote is the paramount concern overriding all others.
And said, continue the votes.
The opinion of the court is unanimous. Thank you, and I will not be taking any questions.
It was the life preserver to the Gore people.
All right!
And it was really perhaps the only time in this process where you saw panic in the Bush camp.
When the Florida Supreme Court said the certification date will not be November 14th, 1 week after the election, as the statute says, but instead we're moving it to November 26th, the Republicans claimed that was changing the rules.
It is simply not fair, ladies and gentlemen, to change the rules, either in the middle of the game or after the game has been played.
And what the Democrats said was no, that the Supreme Court was simply using its equitable powers.
We will move forward now with a full, fair, and accurate count of the ballots in question.
So you had the two tensions between the two sides at all times during this litigation. Was it creating rules or was it interpreting rules? And that was the problem.
Okay, 2 minutes to me. Can you send our runner upstairs to find out exactly what vote count they mean?
Good morning, Bill. A major decision just issued. Miami-Dade Canvassing Board has decided now to consider only the so-called undercount.
I concur.
When they made that decision, Republicans were outraged. They already felt that this process was skewed against them. They were angry, and that's when they went upstairs to begin their protest.
The Republican observers who are protesting upstairs were trying to get into the area where the canvassing board was moving its vote to observe what was going on. They were not being allowed in.
I went up the elevator, and I'll never forget, as the elevator opened onto the 19th floor, the sound that changed for me from the quiet of an elevator
Let the press in!
to the roar of a protest taking place outside of the elevator doors.
Are you getting the feeling that this is out of control, or this seems quite unusual? Everything's been pretty calm to this point.
These are the observers who have been a part of this process, who are now being told they were no longer needed.
This made the Republicans very angry. And it also gave them ammunition to say, this is being done behind closed doors, this is wrong, there's a chance for fraud here.
Let us see the ballots! Let us see the ballots!
Another development.
Arrest him! Arrest him!
We are now on the ground floor where a Democratic attorney for the Democrats has been surrounded by police. Crime scene tape has been put up around him because he was back in that office area and a Republican fingered him and said, he has a ballot.
Sergeant, how many more ballots do you have?
They started pointing at him like a scene from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, pointing at him and saying, he's got a ballot. Eventually, he was quickly escorted back through the lobby with police pushing and running interference for him. He was placed back on the elevator, went back up to the 19th floor, where he pulled out this ballot to reveal that it was a sample training ballot.
Push one twice! Push one twice!
I talked to people from Alabama and Texas and Tennessee and Ohio and Illinois.
Bush and Cheney, go away!
And they all flooded down into Florida, and they'd all traveled around and moved around and showed up when it became critical in the story to make sure their voices were being heard. Whether it was recounts in Broward, recounts in Palm Beach, recount possibilities in Miami-Dade, big court decisions in Tallahassee, they all flooded into town.
Oh, hey, how many votes did you steal today?
Counting and protests both underway here as we stand outside the Emergency Operations Center in Palm Beach County.
Then the campaigns figured out, too, that we're standing there, and they bust people in. So there would be Bush-Cheney people or Lieberman people with signs, and they were right up on us.
No more Gore! No more Gore!
The shouting was so loud at one point that I lost my train of thought for a second, and I had to say on the air, excuse me for a second, the shouting's very loud. I just lost my train of thought. Let's start again.
This is a time to honor the rule of law, not surrender to the rule of the mob.
Dear Secretary Harris, your consideration of our request to extend the deadline for final submission of this hand count until Monday, November 27th at 9:00 a.m. would be greatly appreciated.
Getting confirmation out of the Secretary of State's office here in Tallahassee has told the vote counters down in Palm Beach that the extension for that deadline will not happen.
Your request for filing an amended certification after 5:00 p.m. today is denied.
Palm Beach County Canvassing Board ended up being very frustrated because they spent days and days counting these votes.
We are here today to certify the results of the election.
The smartest thing Katherine Harris did, and looking back on it, I think it was one of the absolute pivotal moments of the whole event, was that ceremony of certification.
The certified result in the presidential race in Florida is as follows. Governor George W. Bush, 2,912,790. Vice President Al Gore, 2,912,253.
But that live coverage with the flags and the silent scratching of the pens and the leather-bound certifications, that was a brilliant tactical move.
So Katherine Harris signs those papers. George W. Bush is the winner again, is the headline. At least it's how they believe people are going to hear it.
Having heard 3 times that Bush had won, they got the impression Bush had won and had been certified, they saw it happen, and that Gore was desperately pursuing a recount.
This evening, the Secretary of State of Florida has decided to certify what by any reasonable standard is an incomplete and inaccurate count of the votes cast in the state of Florida.
The election was close, but tonight, after a count, a recount, and yet another manual recount, Secretary Cheney and I are honored and humbled to have won the state of Florida, which gives us the needed electoral votes to win the election.
A vote is not just a piece of paper. A vote is a human voice, a statement of human principle, and we must not let those voices be silenced.
Al Gore, the fight song, which we heard repeatedly through the campaign, prior to that had been somewhat generic. Well, who was he really fighting for? Well, now he was fighting for a principle, for every vote to be counted as he said it, and for some key and important core Democratic voters.
Time is running short. The public opinion polls, now even a large chunk of Gore voters, are saying it's time to shut it down. And so so their strategy has to change now, and you're going from protesting the election to contesting the election.
So, as provided under Florida law, I have decided to contest this inaccurate and incomplete count in order to ensure the greatest possible credibility for the outcome.
The calculation was made that we're hemorrhaging, and we need to get the vice president out to make the case that this is not over. Don't bail out yet. And to try to do that with a tone that came across as, look, all I want is to count every vote. And I'm not saying I won. I'm just saying that I want to count every vote. And if I didn't win, fine, we'll move on. That was the tone they wanted to strike, and they decided that they needed him to do it because the alarm bells were ringing.
Once we have that full and accurate count of the ballots cast,
it has been almost all Gore all the time on the television networks.
the only way to avoid having a cloud over the next president is to count all the votes.
The Bush team, during the time that Al Gore was, as they called it in the Bush camp, all Al all the time, they felt very strongly that they needed to keep George Bush. He didn't need to be out there.
On the one hand, we've been criticized for being too forward-leaning. Now you suggest maybe we're too laid back. Then I would suggest you can't have it both ways.
Appearances were very scarce. After after that initial, okay, it's been certified, and Al Gore went on the offense, all George Bush really needed to do was sit back and keep planning transition, and that's what he did.
Now we see George W. Bush, Dick Cheney, Laura Bush, Mrs. Cheney, and the Powells walking out.
Governor, with Al Gore all over the airwaves, is this press availability in part because you're responding to criticism that you've appeared out of touch in the past few days? Out of sight and out of touch?
That's pretty humorous, Dave. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
It's because we love the press, right?
Yeah. Thank you all. Thank you.
What they needed, again, back to the same strategy, was they needed George Bush looking presidential.
Gentlemen, how's the mood?
Lawyers for Al Gore are in court at this hour, seeking a recount of some 13,000 questionable ballots. Gore wants a state judge to order a hand recount of disputed ballots in Miami-Dade and Palm Beach counties.
So you have this relatively small courthouse in Tallahassee, Florida, which normally deals with county business, which was now in the business of helping to decide who the President of the United States was.
We would also appreciate it if it's possible to have some help unloading the transfer boxes. I believe there will be 167 of them.
Our clerk is not that big.
Sanders Sauls was a judge in the circuit court level who I believe served as our comic relief. He was always there for a good one-liner.
You know, I really like that guy.
Sanders Sauls had a quote that we picked up on that we thought was quite simply the funniest line we had heard. He said, "All these motions you men filing at me make me feel like I'm getting nibbled to death by a duck."
So that became basically our mantra. We're being nibbled to death by ducks.
Your Honor, I think the court knows that we're not threatening the court with anything and we're not pretending anything.
Well, even if you were, it wouldn't bother me.
Wouldn't bother you a bit. I wouldn't expect it to.
David Boyce himself was a very fascinating character because we stayed in the same hotel. He stayed across the hall from me. And, you know, I thought I didn't bring many clothes down. Well, David Boyce brought even less. He had that same rumpled blue suit and that knit tie and those black tennis shoes. And, but he was always, you know, in a good mood, it seemed like. Always had a smile.
I think the inevitable effect of what they have done is to make it more time-consuming and confusing, and I think anyone knows that.
Let me tell you, we begin always with the premise that we don't believe that it's appropriate to manually recount any ballots at this stage of the proceedings from anywhere.
Do you wish me to look at the witness list?
Barry Richards is a Democrat. Barry Richards, according to one of his best friends, voted for Al Gore. And Barry Richards told me after it was all over that his mother, who's a Democrat down in South Florida, would call him up and say, "What are you doing representing George W. Bush?" He said, "This is my job. I believe he's right with the law. Has nothing to do with politics."
They can send up the ballots that are contested right now. We can't think of any need to hold up our ballots, the contested ballots, which are a few thousand in each case, for the hundreds of thousands of other ballots.
I'm gonna leave it to them. What do y'all want to do down there? You want to send up two times, or you want to do it once? It's your call.
One time from Miami.
One time it is. All right, that's it.
So more than 1 million votes were loaded aboard trucks and trekked from South Florida to the state capital of Tallahassee on a ride that people all over the United States watched throughout the day.
We are awaiting the Ryder truck. We anticipate it to come later this afternoon, possibly between 3 or 4 o'clock, depending on progress on the interstate system here. I felt that some of us actually were somewhat amused by it because it felt like, in all honesty, another O.J. scene.
There's always a moment in these things, no matter how high or low the story, when there's a playful spirit at work. Well, in the case of the Ryder truck, this is television, all news, all the time, at its silliest. That is, you point your camera at something of no consequentiality unless the truck had been hijacked by agents of the Gore or Bush campaigns. Now, because you point a camera at it and put it on live TV, it has to be important.
You know, it's something that the critics will harp on. Here's this Ryder truck and whatever, but, you know, it was, heck, bottom line, it was good television.
Afraid?
Charles, quite a day.
Yes, it is, Frank. Unlike anything I've ever seen here at the Supreme Court.
This is what democracy looks like.
Outside the court, you had a First Amendment exercise going on. Freedom of speech, freedom of assembly.
Get out of Cheney's house. Get out of Cheney's house. I want you all Americans to wake up. Wake up. Wake up.
So there was some street theater, but it was street theater in the pursuit of democratic free speech.
And I walked outside, and it was an absolute madhouse. There was wall-to-wall people.
Indivisible, with liberty and justice.
That day was one of, great anticipation, great drama, really, and also a strange sense that people would hear these disembodied voices, these kind of people from on high that they don't see, they never interviewed, they're not elected, but who in some ways, for that period of time anyway, were the most powerful people in the country.
The Honorable, the Chief Justice and the Associate Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States.
There's this great moment, when the Supreme Court justices walk out. It's almost as if they appear out of a cloud of smoke. They come from behind a curtain as close to their seat as possible. And all of a sudden, then they're there.
God save the United States and this honorable court.
How could it make a difference? What's the consequence of our going one way or the other now in this case?
For some of these counties that have an enormous number of votes to conduct a manual recount.
It's only about the Florida election code.
In the first arguments, probably the telltale note was when Justice Ginsburg said,
I suppose there would be a possibility for this court to remand for clarification.
And I remember noting that down, saying, is this a hint as to what they are going to do? Well, it turned out that's exactly what the justices did in the first instance.
And shortly, I believe, if not already, Roger Cossack, who was in the courtroom, he's going to be talking to us very shortly, but first...
So I left, and I go outside, I run down the steps of the United States Supreme Court. I'm handed a microphone, and the next thing I'm told is to start talking about what I've seen.
Roger, good day to you. What can you tell us? What did you hear? You're our first connection with what's going on in there.
Frank, it was an incredibly dramatic day. At 10:01, we heard Justice Rehnquist announce the case and introduce Mr. Ted Olson, who argued on behalf of the Bush team.
It was extraordinary to have the opportunity to transmit and listen to those tapes directly after the arguments.
They were acting in conflict with one part of the statute, but the
in
adjacent...
a separate section of the opinion.
They were on a fast track. The arguments were on a Friday. Normally it's weeks, if not months, until an opinion comes out, but they knew the deadlines. And we'll see how the justices decide right really is when we get their opinion. No precise word when it will come. The justices themselves, after arguments, at some point will convene in the conference room outside the Chief Justice's office, and each in turn gets to speak his or her piece on the case that they've just heard, and they basically wind up taking a straw poll. Where are we on this?
We are waiting now to what could be rather significant rulings in this race for the White House. The U.S. Supreme Court could rule at any time.
This is an audience of senators and cabinet secretaries.
I just have to go in and interrupt you. I mean, I know that was a huge moment, but it looks like we have a huge moment right now coming out of the U.S. Supreme Court. Just getting word from Associated Press that the U.S. Supreme Court has set aside the ruling on hand-counted votes in Florida.
Manual recounts of ballots and the certification of the recount results. Pardon me for being out of breath. We're actually all sitting in the courtroom listening to arguments in another case when a person from the press office came through and handed this to us.
The first one was a rather short opinion, and it was very clear, at least if you quickly page to the end. It was, I had 2 pages. I think mine was a 2-page printout. But anyway, if you quickly flip to the end, you could see that as a remand. In other words, the United States Supreme Court, it appeared, ducked the issue. They said to the Florida Supreme Court, look, we don't know how you decided this case. We're sending it back to you. Figure it out and send it back to us.
What I think it meant and signaled at the time was there was great divisiveness on the United States Supreme Court, and that in many ways they could not quite figure out an answer.
Circuit Court of the State of Florida and Fort Leon County is now in session. The Honorable Lynn Sanders Sauls presiding.
Please be seated.
When he walked into court and very seriously made it very clear that Al Gore got nothing that he came for, and that George W. Bush was a complete victor in his courtroom.
In this case, there is no credible statistical evidence to establish a reasonable probability that the results of the statewide election in the state of Florida would be different from the result which has been certified by the State Elections Canvassing Commission.
Mr. Boyce, will you appeal?
We're doing it right now. Al Gore's attorneys rushed their appeal, and I mean rushed, like a roadrunner across a field, to the Florida Supreme Court, knowing that this was their last shot.
Everyone in his uncle thought that Vice President Al Gore was dead in the water because Judge Sanders Sauls had written this opinion that seemed pretty locked.
There are some Democrats beginning to get nervous. They did a pretty good job, and Bill Daley deserves a lot of credit for this, and Dick Gephardt and Tom Daschle deserve a great deal of credit for this, of rallying the troops and saying, let's not go off the reservation.
I think everybody wants a fair and accurate count.
And one of the things Gore told people directly in some of his conversations, when they knew somebody was wavering, that person got a call from the vice president, among others. And what his request was, look, if you can't be with me, can you just be nowhere? You know, hide. Don't speak to the media. Say no when people request interviews.
Hear ye, hear ye, hear ye.
Day 30, and again, we sit here and wait.
My name is David Boies.
Before David Boies had almost gotten out of his mouth, good morning, Chief Justice Wells was all over you.
Your Honor, shall manually recount all the ballots.
What the Dade County Board had done is to say...
You could tell going into this case, the level of questioning, they were ready.
What is the time parameter?
They knew the issues. Oftentimes, you go in and give these oral arguments, and you wonder if they've even paid any attention at all, if they've even read the briefs, because you get these questions that are so off the wall from the court. You didn't have that here. This was almost laser beam thinking on behalf of the lawyers and the court.
By late in that week, there was a universal sense, that this was just going to be an enormously difficult thing to turn around. It was probably over. I actually spoke to one Democrat who flat out said, I hope the Supreme Court just comes out, the Florida State Supreme Court comes out and ends it for Al Gore and says no recount. He said, it'll be clean that way. It'll be over with that way, and we can move on.
And the attorneys even got together one of the nights for dinner prior to the second State Supreme Court ruling. And David Boies was there with Phil Beck and Irv Terrell and Barry Richard and Ben Ginsberg and all the big hitters. And they were making their predictions. And all of them said that there was going to be a split court at 4-3.
The next big step in all this presidential recount action comes in the Florida State Supreme Court. And this is the scene there where it looks like they might be getting ready to say something.
We're sitting there and thinking, we knew something was going to come down, but we didn't know when.
My assumption was that the thing was wrapping up. And everybody was saying, well, we've got a couple more days, we've got to let Gore play it out. The Democrats are saying, we'll give him his time. But right throughout the whole thing, almost nobody ever had a sense that Gore could actually prevail.
By a vote of 4-3, the majority of the court has reversed the decision of the trial court in part. It has further ordered that the Circuit Court of the Second Judicial Circuit here in Tallahassee shall immediately begin a manual recount of the approximately 9,000 Miami-Dade ballots that registered under votes.
Sitting there in New York watching this report, and I actually did this. I was like Home Alone. Because I suddenly started thinking, okay, now we are really in a situation where the fertilizer is going to hit the air conditioner.
Holy Mother of God, what are we going to do now? That was truly astonishing, because it looked as if everything was unraveling for Al Gore. It looked as if the recount had been shut down, which it had been at that point.
And you looked at the math and you thought, my God, the lead is now down to whatever it was, 160 votes. Miami-Dade's going to be ordered to recount.
It is a victory for fairness and accountability.
This is what happens when, for the first time in modern history, a candidate resorts to lawsuits to try to overturn the outcome of an election for president.
They really felt, the way their lawyers looked at it and the way, the Florida law works, and far be it from me to try to figure that out even at this point, that the Supreme Court was wrong, that the Florida Supreme Court wrongly ruled on this.
Now you're talking about the possibility of two slates of electors, of a recount that gives Gore the lead, of the Florida State Supreme Court, by writ of mandamus, ordering the governor to certify a slate for Gore, a state legislature then stepping in and saying, it's going to be a Bush slate, a fight in the Congress on January 6th, the likes of which we haven't seen for 125 years, literally. So that moment was the moment when I thought, all right, now you're in, I think I said on the air, we have now left the gravitational pull of planet Earth.
But my attitude was to keep my seatbelt buckled, because we had learned from experience that the unexpected could happen. And in this case, the unexpected did happen. But it wasn't over then. There was still the United States Supreme Court in the wing.
I went to the library where they were starting to count in Tallahassee. And along the way, I ran into Clay Roberts, the head of Division of Elections for Florida. He's walking real fast. I'm walking real fast. I said, Clay, where are you going? He goes, I'm going over here to find Terry Cass, the administrator of the court, because I've got every county in Florida sending me emails screaming at me, we're here ready to count, what do we do?
The greater majority of the counting is going to be conducted based on these so-called punch card ballots.
So all these observers start coming into the library in Leon County. And the observers sit down, and about 9 o'clock in the morning,
performing the vote recount,
the boxes are open, and they start doing what we had seen done so many times in southeastern Florida.
they were counting ballots again.
I'm looking for technical guidance.
The Republicans were saying, no, this is not fair because there are no standards in the state.
Your thoughts on what we're seeing on CNN today?
We're seeing chaos.
But everyone that day seemed to have the feeling that the shoe was going to drop, that the Bush campaign was going to find some way to get that count stopped.
The action requested by the Bush camp is that the recount is stopped.
They go to the court and they say, we want an emergency stay.
By all accounts, things were going very smoothly in Leon County. They counted almost half of the Miami-Dade County ballots. And it surprisingly to some showed a net gain for George W. Bush. Then they made an announcement. We may be stopping the count. Keep counting, but we'll know more in 5 minutes.
We have stayed the recount at this point.
Very big news. The U.S. Supreme Court has agreed.
They had CNN on in the count room, and so as a result, they just stopped.
It was almost as if when the U.S. Supreme Court came out and said, stop, put your hands on the table and walk out of the room, literally, people were picking up ballots and almost in slow motion putting them back on the table.
The Supreme Court has just stopped the process. And so, hey, another day in the life of the 2000 election.
And I remember an observer going through the room and telling people, just tapping them on the shoulders, you know, what had happened in Washington. They kind of rose out of their chairs and kind of tiptoed out of the room. You know, keep the evidence safe. We're not sure what this means, but for now, we cannot continue.
Whatever you think about that ruling, just as a matter of analysis, you'd have to look at that and say, boy, it's going to be real tough for Gore to get anything going now. Because the one thing that he had to have happen, he never got. He never got a recount in motion that at any point would have said to the country, Al Gore actually is in the lead in Florida.
They should have finished the vote when they had it started. It's the only way we'll ever know. But the only way we'll have justice. This is terrible.
The important thing for the Bush team, though, in getting the stay is they got a tip from the United States Supreme Court.
Whoever the next president is.
The tip is that we think you have a really good argument because the court also said that we think you're likely to prevail on the merits. When the Gore campaign heard or read those words, the Gore campaign knew they were in big trouble.
With the nation and the world watching.
Surroundings couldn't be more auspicious. The stakes couldn't be higher.
A lot of passion, a lot of fury outside, a lot of very strong feelings.
To thank Al Gore for making me a Republican activist.
America, count the votes.
This is business. You hit the gavel.
George W. Bush and Richard Cheney versus Albert Gore.
All of us had a feeling that this had to be the real answer, not just the interim response that the court gave the first time.
There are different standards for evaluating those.
There must be a uniform standard.
The question is whether that standard is too general or not.
I understood clearly from listening to those arguments that there was a great concern among members of the court about the equal protection argument.
The standard is whether or not the intent of the voter is reflected by the ballot. That is the uniform standard throughout the state of Florida.
That's very general. It runs throughout the law. Even a dog knows the difference in being stumbled over and being kicked. We know it.
If certain votes are counted one way in one county and they're not counted the same way in another county, aren't those votes that aren't counted that way, don't they count less than the other person's votes? The Supreme Court was clearly concerned about that.
The only problem that we have here is created by people who did not follow instructions.
So we've pretty much sensed we were going to get something Tuesday night.
The decision is going to come out
The judgment of the Supreme Court of Florida.
See all my colleagues madly going through a decision.
Is reversed. As I passed the door of the press officer, she said, page 13. By this time I was on the fly, cell phone in one hand, opinion in the other hand. So I'm going to have to extract that. Why don't you talk to Ken while I look for it?
And I remember saying to Charles on the air, in effect, take your time. And what I was signaling to him was, don't be intimidated by the fact that we're on live worldwide television.
It was almost as though they wanted to say to the press, yeah, you're here at 10 o'clock at night? Lots of luck. Let's see you pull this one off.
Listen to this language from the justices.
Without substantial additional work.
Without substantial additional work.
The safe harbor date is really is today.
Run smack against the calendar.
You have to come up with a standard.
I was the guy freezing in front of the United States Supreme Court in my parka.
That satisfies the Equal Protection Clause.
What the justices said was, it's going to be almost impossible. You'll have to make changes. You'll have to do things that you have not foreseen. You'll have to institute accounting procedures statewide. You'll have to institute some form of checks on that. You'll have to have judiciary review. We don't think you can do it. We, in essence, urge you not to try.
Anyone looking for a resolution of this tonight from the Vice President's camp will not get it. Everyone starts wondering, will we hear any reaction directly from Al Gore tonight? Is there a possibility he would concede tonight and get out? And at that point, they were trying to come up with a reaction. Excuse me for being awkward. I need to look down to read this on my pager. They had a draft of a Bill Daley statement that they were going to release a little bit later. They were still looking it over and tweaking it, but I was fortunate enough to get somebody to email that to me. We will address the court's decision in full detail at a time to be determined tomorrow.
The sense of confidence that this is indeed a victory for George W. Bush.
It didn't take the Bush team long to realize they'd gotten what they believed was a total victory out of the Supreme Court.
This has been a long and arduous process.
But it now becomes a political problem. Okay, we've won in the U.S. Supreme Court, but they don't have a concession from Al Gore. So how do you get a concession from Al Gore? You do what the Bush team had been doing for the past week or so, which is to back off, back off, back off.
Thank you, and good evening.
They wanted to be off the stage and to give it to Al Gore.
The Vice President has ordered the recount committee to suspend all activities and that there will be a statement this evening from the Vice President.
Once freed of any notion that he's going to win, he gave an incredibly gracious and funny and loose speech.
Good evening. Just moments ago, I spoke with George W. Bush and congratulated him on becoming the 43rd President of the United States. And I promised him that I wouldn't call him back this time.
And everybody said after, gee, how come he didn't give those kind of speeches when he was running for president?
For the sake of our unity as a people and the strength of our democracy, I offer my concession.
He did concede the election. If you go back and look at that speech, though, he didn't concede it to anybody. The sentence is structured in a way that he doesn't concede to Governor Bush. And actually, where it comes in the speech, it's almost as if he's conceding to the courts.
While I strongly disagree with the court's decision, I accept it.
He lost, and he really believes that he should have won.
And now, my friends, in a phrase I once addressed to others, it's time for me to go.
They are doing the autopsy, and he, even during the recount, even before he concedes and gets out, suddenly realizes something that people, including the President of the United States, have been warning him about for 8 years. Tennessee.
In the end, Al Gore has to blame himself for losing this election because he did not carry his home state of Tennessee. If he would have carried Tennessee, Florida would have been irrelevant. He would have been the next president of the United States.
The fact is, the drama was all Gore's.
It's my honor to introduce to you
what usually is the ultimate speech of a campaign, and that is either the concession or the victory speech.
The President-elect of the United States, the Honorable George W. Bush.
In this case, more than a month later, was reduced to a scene setter, really. You know, the time for confetti and crowds and posters. In fact, there were signs as you went into this chamber, the House chamber of the Texas legislature, where he gave this speech saying, you know, no posters, no hooting, no, they wanted it almost like a State of the Union address.
Our country has been through a long and trying period.
I saw a reassuring presence, which is what he intended to do in that speech, to try to bring the country together, to play the role that he had always described for himself, to be a uniter, not a divider.
And I hope the long wait of the last 5 weeks will heighten a desire to move beyond the bitterness and partisanship of the recent past. Our nation must rise above a house divided.
And I thought in his speech he clearly cast his lot with the with those who said he just has to unify the country at this point. He has to create his own mandate. He has to build the circumstances of his own honeymoon.
Whether you voted for me or not, I will do my best to serve your interests, and I will work to earn your respect.
Because, this was a honeymoon without a wedding.
I think people will tend to say he's the president of the United States. Let's see what he can do and give him a break. The fact that he lost the popular vote and that there is this asterisk next to Florida, that's irrelevant right now. He is the president. He's going to be the president for 4 years. He's putting together a strong cabinet. Let's see how he can govern, and let's see if he can get the job done.
I think the world had a box seat on two men who showed extraordinary grace under pressure and grace under fire. Actually, they had no alternative.
We're going to have a private discussion.
They had to sit and wait for things to work their course. But I think one of the characteristics they showed was the ability to be calm, the ability to be cool, to take the high road, and the ability to conceal their emotions and their frustrations. Each man knew that one would win, the other would lose. And each man knew that the world would be making judgments accordingly.
There's a puncture at 2.
Okay.
That's a Bush vote.
It will be thought of us as I think as the unharmonic convergence. A year when all the things that weird, nerdy people like me have always worried about the electoral machinery, came to pass, and that what we learned was that in a situation where all the planets align to produce this kind of race, a tie nationally, a tie all over, and a tie in the state that will decide the presidency, the electoral machinery, and for that matter the political machinery, and for that matter the media machinery, weren't up to the task, couldn't handle it, broke down. It broke under the weight of something that only a few strange people had ever worried about. And those of us who worried about something like this, I think will take the ultimate vindication by being able to say, you see, we told you it could happen.
36 days later, it's over.
5 weeks in a day, but who's counting?
No one.
And so we move away now from Election 2000, but there will be plenty of new stories and new faces and new lessons to learn. At times it may have seemed that Election 2000 was one endless civics class, but hopefully we're all a bit smarter now about our elections, our courts, and our country. It sure was a wild ride. I'm Bill Hemmer, and thanks for watching.
Move up from Vice President to President.
John, we're hearing a little bit of an echo because they're watching you on the screen. Right behind you, we're seeing 2 John Kings in the picture here. 2 is better than 1.
Now, why are you here? You have a comfortable life. You could be home watching this on television.
Well, I'm quite attracted to you, John, and that's why I'm here. It's getting a little late. We're getting punchy. Anything can happen. Even an important relationship between you and me could happen. Anything can happen tonight, John. That's how wild this night is.
I hate to disappoint you, but I'm going to rule that out.
Okay.
And throw it back to the studio.
And we especially love your straight face, too, John.
No, a butterfly is a ballot that flew out the window. Oh, really? Okay. It never happened. A ballot with wings.
Animal Planet sent Steve the crocodile hunter down there.
We're here in southern Florida, and what we have here is the rarest creature in the whole world, a Buchanan voter. Oh, what an exquisite specimen she is.
I have here chads. We collected these, Bill, as evidence, and I just want to show you what an actual chad. These are actual chads.
Or dimples.
These are both pregnant and dimpled.
I
See?
love it.
Perfectly innocuous, and yet
78
they
pieces
could
of
change
chad on the floor.
Exactly. We found those at CNN.
Should they be counted? Should they not be counted?
No. Yes.
You are anti-dimple.
I'm definitely anti-dimple.
You prefer dimpled or pregnant? Dimple.
I hate the pregnant one. I hate it.
The term?
You know what? And you can tell every politician that says it starts to sneer, or every news media person wants to laugh.
You know what a dimpled ballot is?
Dimple.
Dimple. Dimple.
Dimple. Dimple.
We welcome our international viewers. It is only 2 p.m. here on the East Coast, but already it's turned into the night the lights went out in Georgia. We're having light problems here in Atlanta, and we hope to fix that as soon as a manual recount of our lighting system is done.
Legally, not a lot happens, but this has been as much about PR as it's been about the law. In the last few weeks, you've seen car alarms go off. There's no way it's going to keep going.
You know, Laura Ingraham, if you can talk through a car alarm, you can do anything. You're my hero.
You saw the amount of sensitivity that I used in that, and you saw me trying to get that done, but clearly the wind's kicking up here big time, by the way. I'm just trying to hold down the light. Sorry about that. A silver coin produced in Dallas, Texas. It has Al Gore on one side and George W. Bush on the other. I don't know if it's come to that just yet. I'll watch it for you.
I bet if you flip that coin, it lands on its edge, too.
It may come down this way, right? Right on the side.